Today we're going to be talking about Teemo's main runes. Teemo has 7 different runes to choose from, and every single one of these runes has a different playstyle. I'm not going to go too into depth as to why Fleetfoot and Lethal Tempo are not on this list, as these 2 runes have superior alternatives, that being Halo Blades and Grasp. So first up is Aery. Aery is a very good laning rune, and that's basically all it is. For a very long time, Teemo players have been playing this, especially when runes were remade, because of how much damage it could actually do, and the fact that most champions were not taking bone plating against us, or even second wind with Thorn Shield. Now that the meta has been pretty, set in stone, most people are going to be taking bone plating and Adorned Shield against you, which really reduces how much damage you can actually do with Aery as your main rune. Ideally, you're looking to win your laning phase with Aery, Mana Flow Band, Absolute Focus, Scorch, Cheap Shot, and Ravenous Hunter, with the attack speed offense, the adapted force flex, and the either defense armor or defense magic resistance based on the enemy's composition or who you're going up against right now. Alternatively, you can choose Transcendence and potentially going into a Gathering Storm. But you have to understand that Aery is a early game rune, so you're trying to get as much damage as you possibly can in your early game, in which case this would be Absolute Focus and Scorch. Once the game goes past 19 minutes and the early game is over, these 2 runes in general become much more useful to you. Aery is meant mostly for new players and low elo players, since most enemy champions are not going to properly build against you, that being Bone Plating and Adorned Shield, which makes them much more squishier and susceptible to consistent poke damage. So ideally all you're going to be doing is auto-attacking, waiting, and then picking her up as the enemy champions are poisoned, which keeps sending her out for free damage. Double proccing Aery will not aggro minions, and it will also hit them while they're in bushes. So the second rune in the sorcery tree that we're going to be talking about is Phase Rush. Phase Rush essentially has one purpose. That is to stop enemy champions from slowing you and then running away from them. It doesn't do damage, it just helps you escape. So these mostly are champions like Nasus, Darius, and Seth. There are a few other champions that it can be taken into, but those are the main 3. Mandatory against Nasus, preference against the other 2. Ideally, your runes are going to be Phase Rush, Mana Flow Band, Absolute Focus, Scorch, Taste of Blood, Ravenous Hunter, Offense Attack Speed, Flex Adaptive Force, Defense Armor, or Defense Magic Resistance. You can either take Nimbus Cloak and Celerity for a little bit extra mobility, or you can take Transcendence and Gathering Storm for more late game damage. I wouldn't recommend giving up Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter, as these are really mandatory if you don't take Riftmaker. If you do take Riftmaker, you can decide to go into something more attack speedy, like Alacrity and Coup de Grace, or even more defensive, like Second Wind or Bone Plating with Overgrowth. While on the laning phase, so long as you hit the enemy champion 3 times, you'll get the bonus movement speed, but most importantly, you'll get the slow resistance of 75%, The next rune that we're going to be talking about is Grasp of the Undying. Grasp of the Undying is one of the most popular runes on Teemo because it's safe, has a lot of sustain, and it makes people tanky, which Teemo really doesn't do well without this rune. Ideally, your runes are going to be Grasp of the Undying, Demolish, Bone Plating, Overgrowth, Taste of Blood, Ravenous Hunter, Offense Attack Speed, Flex Adaptive Force, Defense Armor, or Defense Magic Resistance. I would highly recommend to only play this rune into Malphite and Gangplank, as these two champions are extremely high on sustain and extremely high on poke damage. Alternatively, you could take it into Riven and Wukong, as these champions do a lot of burst damage, in which case you would keep Bone Plating. However, against Malphite and Gangplank, you would be taking Second Wind. The reason for this is because Bone Plating does not work against poke. If the enemy champion is hitting you once and then backing off, you're not getting anything out of this one rune. So you're going to be taking Second Wind to get more sustain back from them. And if you're going up against Malphite, you're going to be switching to Magic Resistance as opposed to Defense Armor. In terms of your secondary runes, again, it's mostly going to be Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter, but if you do go for a Riftmaker build with Grasp of the Undying, I wouldn't really recommend it, as it's not going to give you damage, it's just going to give you a ton of sustain. But if you do go Riftmaker, you can actually go with a Alacrity and Last Dance for a lot more damage late game, especially when you fall below a certain amount of HP. Or just Alacrity and Coup de Grace, or Alacrity and Presence of Mind for more mana sustain, as you are going to have very little mana with this build. While in the laning phase with Grasp of the Undying, you're looking to auto-attack an enemy minion or an enemy champion, wait 4 seconds, or before 4 seconds, auto-attack the enemy champion so that the proc happens, and then keep auto-attacking the champion at 4 seconds. Every single time you auto-attack, you're getting 3 extra HP, you're getting sustain, and you're dealing a lot of damage to that enemy champion. The more auto attacks you can get early, the stronger you will be later. The next rune that we're going to be talking about is Press the Attack. Now, comparatively to Grasp of the Undying, Press the Attack is the complete opposite of that rune. Press the Attack is an extremely aggressive rune that does a tremendous amount of damage from the early game into the mid game and straight into the late game. Primarily, your runes are going to be Press the Attack, Triumph, Alacrity, Coup de Grace, Cheap Shot, Ravenous Hunter, Offense Attack Speed, Flex Adaptive Force, Defense Armor, or Defense Magic Resistance. Alternatively, if you find that you are not getting a lot of mana, or you're running out of mana a lot, I would highly recommend that you take Presence of Mind as your alternative. It's not very necessary, as blue buffs and honey fruits exist, and this build is 100% auto attack reliant as opposed to spamming your Q and spamming your R. Your secondaries can be either Cheap Shot, Ravenous Hunter for even more sustain, late game split pushing potential with Celerity and Gathering Storm, or mitigation from burst champions like maybe a Riven or a Renekton with Bone Plating and Overgrowth. The entire playstyle of Press the Attack is to essentially kite your enemy and kill your enemy. So you're going to be maxing your W and then your E, and running them down with 3 auto attacks, followed up by your Blinding Dart and any shrooms that you've placed down at your feet or nearby. Because when you deal 3 auto attacks to an enemy champion, they're going to be vulnerable for the next 6 seconds, which allows you to deal 8 to 12% extra damage to them. It's an extremely aggressive early game rune that can basically win every single 1v1 for you, so long as you're properly kiting. The next rune that we're going to be talking about is Electrocute. Now, Electrocute is entirely based on burst damage. This could be burst damage from your Q, or burst damage from your E when properly built with Lichbane and Nashor's Tooth. Your normal runes are going to be Electrocute, Taste of Blood, Eyeball Collector, Ravenous Hunter, Alacrity, Coup de Grace, Offense Attack Speed, Flex Adaptive Force, Defense Armor, or Defense Magic Resistance. There are a few alterations you can make to these builds. specifically Cheap Shot instead of Taste of Blood, Ghost Poro instead of Eyeball Collector, Presence of Mind instead of Coup de Grace, Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm if you know your games are going to last more than 35 minutes. Alternatively, you can get more mana sustain with Mana Flow Band if you run into that problem. And Bone Plating and Overgrowth for a lot of burst matchups. Or if you decide to take this rune instead of Grasp into Malphite and Gangplank, Second Wind. While playing into those champions, you're mostly going to be taking Taste of Blood. There are two different ways you can utilize Electrocute in the laning phase. The first and most common way is simply utilizing Electrocute as soon as it comes off cooldown to burst your opponent. Another way of utilizing Electrocute is Controlled Burst. Controlled Burst means you're going to be auto-attacking them, waiting a few seconds, auto-attacking again, so that you're always in 1 out of 3 activations to proc that rune. Once your opponent falls below a certain amount of HP, usually 30% HP, you finish them with a Q, auto, and ignite. As most people are not going to expect the sudden burst from an auto attack and a Q. The next rune that we're going to be talking about is Dark Harvest. Now, Dark Harvest, like Electrocute, is a burst rune, but it's more inconsistent because you need to be stacking the rune early game for it to benefit you into the late game. Your main runes are going to be Dark Harvest, Cheap Shot, Ghost Poro, Ravenous Hunter, Alacrity, Coup de Grace, Offense Attack Speed, Flex Adaptive Force, Defense Armor, or Defense Magic Resistance. Just like the other runes, there are a few different alterations you can make to the build. I wouldn't really recommend taking anything other than Cheap Shot and Ghost Poro, as this helps you with your early game damage. But you can definitely take Taste of Blood and Eyeball Collector if you do prefer. If you're looking for more late game damage and terror, you can, instead of taking Ravenous Hunter, take Ultimate Hunter instead. This gives you more cooldown on your shrooms, which allows you to potentially lay down shrooms every 5 to 7 seconds. I would only recommend taking this if you're comfortable not taking sustain. Your secondary runes can be Alacrity and Presence of Mind if you're running into mana problems. If you know your games are going to last anywhere from 35 to 50 minutes, you're definitely going to want to take Gathering Storm. And then again, if you're running into mana problems, you take a Mana Flow Band. Or if you want more late game cooldown, you would take Transcendence and Gathering Storm. While playing Dark Harvest in the laning phase, you have to understand one thing. Dark Harvest requires you to have stacks. Comparatively to Electrocute, you need to have 25 stacks of Dark Harvest to outscale the consistent damage that Electrocute can offer you. You're going to look to attack an enemy champion as much as you possibly can early game, not with the intention to kill, with the intention to stack. Once they fall below 50% HP, that is where you're going to try to keep them. Your poison will always activate the Dark Harvest stack, so what you're looking for is them to be low HP while it's on cooldown. Once it's off cooldown, your poison will automatically proc it, which gives you a 45-second stack. So if you only have 5 stacks by 20 minutes, just take Electrocute. So we're not going to talk about Halo Blades too much, but essentially it's mostly used in the jungle. If you do by chance take it in the laning phase, what you're going to be looking for is an auto attack to activate the extra attack speed, which helps you properly CS and also poke 3 times. There really isn't any alteration you're going to be making with this rune besides Ghost Poro over Eyeball Collector or Taste of Blood over Cheap Shot. You need the attack speed from Alacrity, as it is a attack speed rune, it's going to go above the attack speed of 2.5, which helps you deal even more damage late game. So it's really good for on-hit and attack speed items. You can alternatively take Presence of Mind, but you're mostly auto-attack reliant, so you're not going to be utilizing many shrooms or your Q for damage. So now we're going to be talking about, briefly, the off-meta runes for Teemo. Teemo can play Glacial, Fleetfoot, Lethal Tempo, Comet, and Omnistone, but for the most part, Omnistone is like taking one primary rune and two secondaries. In this case, that would be Omnistone, Cheap Shot, and Ravenous Hunter. Every other rune in Inspiration Tree is borderline useless on Teemo, as there have been many nerfs and changes to these runes. Comet is one of the worst runes to take on Teemo. The main reason that this is a poor rune for Teemo is due to the fact that it does not have any application for your early game, nor for your mid game. The damage from Comet comes exclusively from your shrooms and the slow that your shroom applies. If you try to Q a target early game, the Comet is not going to hit its target. It's going to hit nearby because your enemy is simply going to sidestep it. The main reason most people like playing Comet is because when they start up a new game of League of Legends as a new player, they are forced to play the Calamity. You're restricted to playing Calamity until you're about level 12, in which you can start switching around. It's mostly people who have gotten used to a playstyle that really doesn't benefit Teemo in general. So I would highly recommend never to play this rune unless you're playing a game mode like Earth mode. Lethal Tempo, in comparison to Halo Blades, is a lot weaker in the early game, but scales into a monster late game. With Halo Blades, you're restricted to 3.5 attack speed, whereas Lethal Tempo does not have a cap. However, Halo Blades with a more attack speed early game is usually more beneficial as you're getting 110% attack speed early, whereas Lethal Tempo is only going to be giving you 40%. Wouldn't recommend playing this unless you're planning on playing a full on-hit with all of the on-hit items. So that'll be Nashor's, Wit's Ends, Blade of the Rune King, Kraken Slayer, etc. I really wouldn't recommend taking Fleetfoot, as Grasp of the Undying offers you much more, that being damage and actual HP scaling. We used to play Fleetfoot back in about Season 8, when we had crit split builds with Static Shiv. However, with the changing of the meta and the changing of the runes, those builds fell off. And last but not least, we're going to be talking about Glacial. Glacial is a very unique and niche playstyle that I wouldn't really recommend to people who want damage. It's mostly for people who really want to piss off their opponents. Again, this rune is only meant for people who really want to torment top laners. These top laners are mostly Darius and Seth, especially if they have a Hecarim jungle or a Nunu jungle. Your runes are going to be Glacial, Magical Footwear, Minion Dematerializer, Approach Velocity, Cheap Shot, Ravenous Hunter, Offense Attack Speed, Flex Adaptive Force, Defense Armor, or Defense Magic Resistance. I really wouldn't recommend you to change any of your runes, as all of these runes benefit each other. Glacial benefits Cheap Shot, giving you free true damage on every empowered auto attack, while also benefiting the Approach Velocity, which gives you 15 movement speed towards a champion that you currently have impaired, that being slowed. You're going to be maxing your W second, but your build path is E, W, Q, E, E, R, W, W, followed by either more in your W or more into your E. The reason is because Magical Footwear is going to be applied to you at 12 minutes. Darius, Seth, and a couple other champions topside already have base 10 movement speed against you, regardless of what you have currently on you. If you get hit, you're going to be 10 movement speed less than they are. And if you do manage to get caught, you're going to be running Everfrost. Everfrost allows you to drop an AoE in front of them, which either locks them down or slows them by 65% for 5 seconds. That is absolutely huge, especially with the fact that they do not have Stridebreaker Dash anymore. While playing Glacial in the laning phase, your main goal is simply to get the true damage and annoy the hell out of the laner. If they move forward towards you, you can poke them and move away. They will not be able to chase you. Every single auto attack that you do is going to do 10 damage early game, that's true damage, which cannot be mitigated by anything. As you start to level up, this true damage starts to ramp up from 10 to 45 late game. So it may not seem like much, but trust me when I say that it does a tremendous amount of damage when used properly. Every 7 seconds early game, scaling down to 4 into the late game. If you attack an enemy champion once, you have to wait 7 seconds. If you attack another champion, you don't actually have to wait, because the cooldown is not rune related, it's champion related. So here's a clip of us utilizing Everfrost to lock down 3 targets, which allows for our Zyra and our Katarina to engage and shut them down. Once again, your laning phase is going to suffer a little bit, but you're mainly there for supporting and to annoy. I'd like to say once again, thank you very much for watching this video. If it's helped you and you would like to learn more, you can catch me on Twitch at the Yodel Scout. You could also join us on Teamos United, or even ask me a question here in the comments or on Twitter. I'll be happy to send you a message back immediately, within about an hour or so, unless I'm currently sleeping. I didn't add too many videos for in-game references in actual games, as I don't really play many of these runes anymore. I'm more exclusively playing Press the Attack currently. With that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.